Welcome back to UT San Diego News. I'm Tristan Nichols. I'm joined now with two very special guests. We've got the UT military reporter, Jen Steele, and Ray Mabus, Secretary of the Navy. Good afternoon to you both. Now, start just off the top. We want to ask you, what's your view on the state of the fleet and the Marine forces in San Diego County, given the recent budget cuts?
Well, San Diego has been such a great town, such a great area for the Navy and the Marine Corps. And as you know, we're rebalancing to the Pacific. So there's going to be more attention to the Pacific and to the areas that our ports in the Pacific.
You've been around San Diego this morning visiting workers. What was their reaction to meeting you? What were the main questions that they brought up?
Well, I was at NASCO, and NASCO is one of our very best shipyards. They produce our auxiliary ships. Right now, they're building the mobile landing platform. They ask what you would expect and what they should ask, and that is, what's the future of the fleet? What's the future of numbers? How are we doing in San Diego? And as I said, they're one of our best performing yards, and one of the things I talked to them about, the Navy fleet declined. Our Navy fleet declined from 2001, 316 ships, to 2008, 278 ships, and that was during one of the great military buildups in American history. The 4 years before I became secretary, we put 19 ships under contract, the Navy did. Since I've been secretary, the 4 years I've been secretary, we've put 60 ships under contract.
So did they feel reassured by what you had to tell them?
I want to do a couple of things. I want to grow the fleet. I want to protect the industrial base, particularly of shipbuilding, because it is such a unique skill.
So some of the questions that the sailors ask you today, we want to ask you about as well, and one of them is about women in combat. And we know that the Marines recently delayed their pull-up standard. Women were going to have to do 3 pull-ups on January 1, and they found that not enough people were able to make that at boot camp, and so they delayed it. So my question to you is, does that give you any pause?
I think for the Marines, they're doing this in a very measured way, in a very, very careful way. But number one, we want to make sure we're using the right standards, that it actually means something in combat, that that a physical standard is important, and that once they get the right standards, because a lot of these jobs, frankly, have not had any standards.
Do you think the 3 pull-up is a good standard?
Oh, I don't know. What I want to do, again, I'm not an expert on what the right standard is, but I want to get to a standard that means something in combat, not just an arbitrary thing that you've got out there. And secondly, my personal view is, once you get those standards into place, it shouldn't matter about your gender. As long as you meet the standards, you ought to be able to get into whatever unit that is. I mean, you know, you look at SEALs, 80% of men that volunteer don't make SEALs. And so I don't think it ought to be a matter of gender, as long as you meet those qualifications.
So the day is going to come when the SEAL Command has a chance to say, yes, we think we can do this, or no, we don't think that this is appropriate venue for them.
What do you think? What are you going to say at that point?
Well, I usually don't answer questions before I have to, but I think you look back at what I've done. I put women on submarines, first on ballistic missile and guided missile. We expanded that a few months ago to Virginia class. We started with officers, now we're moving to enlisted. And we just did Riverine for women. And you know, in the Navy, we couldn't put the fleet to sea without women. And I think that is a very good thing. And the final thing I will note, to show how far Navy has come, one small example, is we just named a woman Vice Chief of Naval Operations, first time in history. And she got there not because she was female, but because she was the right person for the job.
Another thing that you were asked about today by the media was the Glenn Defense Marine scandal. And of course, that's being tried right here in San Diego in federal court. So one of the questions we want to ask you is, we've already had a number of Navy personnel included in that, named in that. And I know you have said that there are probably more to come. I wonder if you could tell us kind of just a general gauge. Are we seeing maybe a handful more, dozens more? Can you kind of give us an idea of the scope of this?
Well, first I want to say, as I said to the media today, this was a Navy investigation. We turned this up, NCIS investigated it. We've worked very closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and I want to brag on them and how good the partnership has been here. But when I came in, my first elective job, I was state auditor. So I have a real interest in financial controls and trying to make sure that people don't cheat financially. And so since the day I got here, I've been trying to make sure we've got those controls in place, to make sure we are checking. And anytime you have the amount of money that we put out, you're going to have people trying to cheat. One of the other things I want to point out is the Navy is pretty unique. We announce when we relieve somebody. If we relieve a commanding officer, we announce it, and we announce the reason that we did it. We pretty much stand alone in that, in doing that.
Okay. Secretary Jen Steele, thanks very much for joining us today. And please come back to us after the break. We'll have more on UT San Diego News.